how customers are taking back control of their technology roadmap, what ERP vendor roadmaps reveal about AI in 2026, and why some ECC customers are being told to spend over $100 million on an S/4HANA implementation. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 264 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 264. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital strategy, including the people, process, technology sides of change. Thanks for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO at Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world select and implement and recover from their digital transformations. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for today.
Yes, we've got a fun episode planned for you here today. This is especially relevant if you are a ERP software customer who's trying to figure out what your path forward is and how to potentially regain control of your path forward rather than marching to the orders of a vendor dictated timeline. We're going to cover some topics here today that will dive into that in more detail. We'll start off with some social media questions. We'll get into some newsworthy topics around what ERP vendor roadmaps are revealing about AI in 2026. We'll also talk about how enterprise software faces AI-driven disruption. And then later in the show, we will have Eric Helmer from Rimini Street. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Rimini Street, which is a third-party ERP software support provider. He'll be on the show talking about how customers are using third-party support to take back control of their roadmap. So that'll be a great conversation if you're a legacy ERP software customer using SAP ECC or Microsoft Dynamics or J.D. Edwards PeopleSoft, one of these older versions of ERP software, and you're trying to figure out what your path forward looks like for maintenance and potential upgrades. We'll cover that with Eric from Rimini Street. And then later in the show, we'll give you a case study of a customer of ours or a client of ours at Third Stage that was using a perfectly fine version of ECC, and they were trying to be convinced by SAP to upgrade to S/4HANA with a $100 million price tag. So we'll talk about what that company chose to do and how they navigated that difficult decision and some of the pros and cons and trade-offs they were willing to make. So a lot to cover here today, but before we jump into all of that, what are some of the questions we've received here on social media, Darian?
Yeah, the first question we have today is about software vendor contracts. So, Eric, software vendor contracts are one of the most daunting steps in any ERP selection. But should you approach your ERP vendor negotiation as a collaboration or a competition?
Yeah, I think it's in some ways a bit of both. I mean, ideally you want it to be a collaboration, something that allows you to work with the vendor to take advantage of the technology they provide, but also making sure that you stick to your priorities and what your needs are. And so there's no reason it should turn into a competition, although sometimes it does. But I think that's where you've got to make sure as a buying customer that your own interest and the things you need as an organization win out in the end. Those should be that should be the top thing you consider.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Our next question today, I also found super interesting. So, Eric, obviously, you talk a lot about SAP and how they're putting a lot of pressure on existing customers to migrate to S/4HANA. The question we got on LinkedIn is, if your current ERP still works for your business, at what point does vendor pressure become a reason to look elsewhere entirely?
It's a good question, and I struggle with that because it's a big deal to go a completely different direction if you're using Microsoft or SAP or whatever your current software provider is. You know, if you can upgrade to a newer version from that same vendor, it's generally speaking going to be less disruptive than if you try to move an entirely different direction. So I think the threshold that you would need to clear to be able to justify a new potential system, I think that's the big deciding factor is, are you going to get materially more business value, or is it going to cost you materially less to justify that massive switch from one vendor to another? I do think, that's a short-term pain, though. I think you have to think longer term about the longer-term potential of what what does it mean in terms of vendor lock? Just because you stick with your current vendor, it might be easier in the short term, but it could actually create more of a vendor lock situation that's harder to get out of later. So you've got to think short term and long term about that. But I think generally speaking, we don't see as many customers today as we did, say, 10 or 20 years ago that are making wholesale changes. Like I'm going from Epicor to SAP, or I'm going from Infor to Epicor, or I'm going from SAP to Microsoft. We're not seeing as many cross vendor switching as we had in the past. And I think a lot of that is because of the switching costs being so high. But I also think that's a risk for the industry longer term as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That question actually kind of nicely leads us into our first newsworthy article today, which is all about ERP vendor roadmaps and what they reveal about AI in 2026. So to get right into this, a new analysis reveals that 2025 is the year AI shifted from being a bolt-on feature in ERP platforms to functioning more like an operating layer. And 2026 is shaping up to be the year that shift actually changes how finance and operations teams do their daily work. Across SAP, Oracle, Workday, and NetSuite, vendors are now deploying purpose-built agents, SAP Joule agents, and Workday's Illuminate agents among them, designed to assemble multi-step workflows and route them for human approval rather than just automating isolated tasks. ERP systems are also moving from static dashboards towards real-time narrative explanations of variances, reducing the need for offline spreadsheet analysis. NetSuite has released an AI connector service built on Model Context Protocol, enabling external AI models to interact safely with ERP data within existing governance structures. The through line across vendors is shifting from human effort to navigating systems to reviewing expectations and owning judgment calls. Overall, the key takeaway from this article is that ERP in 2026 is moving from feature to infrastructure, but the vendors that are making it stick are the ones keeping humans in the approval loop, not removing them. So Eric, with this, the first question I want to get into is agent assisted with human sign-off truly a new workflow, or is it just an automation with a rebrand?
I think it is a potential for a new workflow, but I think the human assisted side of it is critical. I mean, I think a lot of times people think that they can fully automate a process without humans, and we've seen a lot of case studies of examples of companies that have gotten into trouble and run into AI slop and delusions and things of that nature, or not delusions, hallucinations that can corrupt those workflows. So I think that's why the human assisted piece of it is so important. So I think the key here, though, is to really carefully design and clearly design the workflow, the process, make sure it's tested, make sure that people understand it and that it's vetted before you scale and roll it out to broader teams. And that includes defining how people's jobs, roles, and expectations are all going to change too, because that's just as important, maybe even more important than the AI tool itself, is just making sure people understand how to use it and how the workflow should look in a human assisted AI driven workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. A question I have with that is, how should CFOs evaluate AI claims from ERP vendors during the selection cycle right now?
I think the biggest thing is if you can get specific use cases or case studies of what customers are using the software for to do. That's always pretty eye-opening. It's one thing to say, I've got all these AI agents that you could deploy and that could be used theoretically, versus a customer who says, we actually did deploy this functionality. Here's what we learned. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. So I would benchmark to other customers of that technology to see how they're using it, what kind of pitfalls they ran into, what kind of lessons learned they have, because I think that's probably the best way to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And last question I have with this is, how does a mid-market company with limited IT staff actually govern AI agents running inside their ERP?
Well, I think first of all, asking the question of how are we going to govern it is the first thing. A lot of organizations don't even get that far. So just by asking the question of how do we want to govern it is the first step. And then of course, from there, I think it's really a matter of having an active process management function or capability within your teams, to where you are defining what that future state process and workflow is going to be. You are defining how people's jobs are going to be impacted by it. You're building training materials to support it. If needed, you're changing job descriptions and job responsibilities and roles. All those things need to come together to provide a fully integrated AI workflow. The AI tool itself won't do it, but it's all the other stuff that needs to be put in place: the governance, the processes, the roles and responsibilities, all that stuff. And that's not really an IT thing. That's more of a business leadership and operational thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this kind of gets into our next newsworthy article, which is about AI driven disruption and how enterprise software faces that as productivity gains fail to materialize. So, what this article is about is a report from AlixPartners finds that while AI coding tools are delivering 20 to 30% development productivity gains inside enterprise software companies, most organizations are failing to capture strategic business value from those improvements. And mid-market software vendors are facing major M&A wave as a result. So AlixPartners predicts that enterprise software M&A will surge 30 to 40% year over year to an estimated $600 billion in 2026, driven by AI forcing consolidation among mid-market vendors who can't keep pace. For buyers, ERP vendor roadmaps may become less predictable as companies prioritize speed of development over strategic coherence. Conversational AI interfaces are shifting the buyer profile from IT evaluators to functional leaders who interact with systems directly through natural language, fundamentally changing how ERP selection should work. The report also flags that 95% of AI pilots are failing due to governance gaps, and trust deficits are costing organizations an average of $670,000 extra per security incident. So the key takeaway overall in this article is faster software development powered by AI is not automatically translating to better enterprise software. And the consolidation wave in 2026 means the vendor you select today may look very different in the next 18 months. So, Eric, with that, if 95% of AI pilots are failing due to governance gaps, what does governance first AI rollout actually look like?
Well, I think we have to get back to the basics of what it is we're trying to accomplish. I think AI is such a powerful tool, but it's also one that could be used in so many different ways that it can be overwhelming to the point where it will actually backfire when it comes to adoption, because if you don't have clarity around how to use the software, it's not going to have any guardrails and deliberate purpose in place. And so I think the way around that is to clearly define those business processes and that future state workflow and how you expect people to interact with AI, and you want to test it and improve it and almost treat it as an innovative set of processes that you could test out and see what's working and stop doing less of what's not working, and then scale it out to the rest of the organization. So it just requires, unlike more mature technologies like an ERP system, which is relatively stable and relatively predictable, AI is not predictable. That's the whole power of it, but it can be a blessing and a curse. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. So the way around that is to recognize that you've got to treat AI initiatives a lot different than you would an ERP project or a more mature technology project. You've got to have even more clarity around the people, process, and strategy side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And does the shift to conversational interfaces fundamentally change who should lead ERP evaluations in IT, whether it's IT or business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be curious to see, and I suspect that IT will become less of a voice. I don't think it'll become minimized, but I just don't think IT will have as much influence as they might today in some organizations. I think the business requirements and the business functional needs, that will end up becoming a more important driver. And I would say that's probably a good thing for the long term, because then the tail is not wagging the dog. You actually are using technology as an enabler rather than technology as a tool for technology's sake. So I think it will change the internal organizational dynamics. It's just a matter of, will it change enough, and will it change in the right way for organizations to figure out how to be more successful with AI initiatives than they've been with other types of technology deployments historically.
Yeah, absolutely. And last question I have is, what's the right budget split between AI tooling and the trust/governance infrastructure that it makes it safe to deploy?
Well, I think you spend less money and time on the AI tool itself and more on the governance, building the predictable processes and workflows, and defining how people's jobs need to look and what their roles are going to be within these AI driven workflows. All that stuff, I would spend more time and money on that than the tool itself, the AI tool itself. AI, the technology is not cheap. It can be expensive, but to do it right, you want to invest even more time on the other stuff that's not related to the technology itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting articles I found today, but I'm excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to bring Eric on the show. It'll be his first time on. We've had one other guest in the past from Rimini Street on the show, but this will be the first time Eric is on. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Rimini Street, and Rimini is a third-party support provider that provides software support for SAP ECC, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, other types of legacy and on-prem systems. They provide a sort of a lifeline to give customers more of a runway to use their legacy systems while they try and figure out what they're going to do longer term with potential upgrades or changes to their technology stack. So we're going to bring him on the show. We'll talk about how companies throughout the world are using third-party support maintenance providers like them to take control or regain control of their technology roadmap. And then later in the show, we'll provide a case study from an actual client of ours. We'll redact the name of that client, but we'll talk about the specific client that was using a legacy version of SAP. ECC is the software they're using. They were told by SAP they needed to upgrade to S/4HANA. It was going to cost upwards of $100 million. And we'll tell you what the verdict was and how the customer navigated the pros and cons of that potential roadmap. So stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 264. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So I'm excited for our next guest, first-time guest on the show. Eric Helmer is the Chief Technology Officer of Rimini Street. We've had guests from Rimini Street on in the past, but never Eric in particular. He's the Chief Technology Officer there. He's been with the company for several years, and Rimini Street is a third-party software support provider. So we're going to talk with him today about how customers are regaining control of their technology roadmaps with third-party supports. So with that all being said, Eric, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is super exciting. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's super fun. And you and I got to know each other a bit a few weeks ago. I was in your neck of the woods. We filmed some videos together that'll be forthcoming on YouTube here shortly. Some joint content we created, and we got to talking about the industry, a lot of deep philosophical stuff about this industry. And I think what I love about what you guys do is you are somewhat of a disruption to the industry, a disruption to the status quo, a disruption to limited options in the marketplace. You're providing more options to people. But for those that don't know you or Rimini Street, why don't we talk about you first, and then I want to ask you a little bit more about Rimini Street. What do you guys do? So tell me about you. What do you do at Rimini? What's your background? How'd you get here? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Technology Officer here for Rimini Street, and I run a global team of regional CTOs all over the world. And our main mission is to help our customers plot and plan their roadmap for their ERP. As you can imagine, there's so many people at a crossroads trying to figure out what to do next. Do they go to the cloud? Do they not go to the cloud? Do they re-implement? Do they rip it all out and replace it? Do they keep the car running for longer? And there's lots of considerations for that. So I come from mostly of a consulting background, really heavy in Oracle, but then soon became really heavy into SAP out of necessity, and then started growing through the ranks at Rimini Street. So I've been with the company for about 8 years now.
Okay, very cool. Did you start off your career as more of a technologist work at Oracle and within the Oracle and SAP worlds, or?
Yeah, it was in that. I was, the system admin, the DBA, the SAP admin, the basis guy, that kind of infrastructure IT kind of background, and then slowly got into consulting, and then got into hosting, private cloud hosting. This was really before all the hyperscalers and things of that sort. So kind of went up through that way.
Very cool. Now, tell me a bit about Rimini Street. A lot of people I talk to in the industry still don't know who you guys are. They don't know that this category of solution exists in the space, but tell us a little bit about Rimini and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Rimini Street invented the category of third-party vendor replacement support. So what happens is that third-party maintenance is when an organization will hire an independent support provider to maintain and support their existing ERP systems instead of the original software vendor, right? So what happens is our customers no longer renew their annual maintenance and support agreements with companies like Oracle and SAP, and instead we provide a much elevated, better support experience at a fraction of the cost, right? So, vendor technologies and support is kind of designed to keep people on their vendor roadmap, constantly upgrading, constantly rebuying, constantly re-implementing their software. It's kind of like a car lease program to where you have to get a new car every 3 years in order for you to be so you're constantly releasing and kind of vendor provided third-party support is kind of just buy the car once and then hire a master mechanic that's just going to keep it running and at a much a fraction of the cost and a much better outcome. So it's a little bit different, a way to think about it. And I think a lot of people get confused and, whoa, I didn't even know that was an option. Why would I want to do this? What's the advantages and all that? And hopefully I can clear some of that up here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess that's the blessing and the curse of creating a new niche in the industry is the fact that you have to educate the market as to what it is and what the pros and cons are. Starting with some of the objections we hear in the marketplace, from clients, probably the biggest one we hear as well. Sounds great in theory, but why would we want to go to a third party to get support when we could just get it from the guys and gals that actually develop the software?
Sure.
That's probably the biggest objection.
But you're right. It's been quite a ride. We've started the company in 2005 with PeopleSoft. That's how we did.
Yeah.
And so now you fast forward up to now, and it's just been one heck of a ride. We're up to I have over 6,500 signed clients now all over the world. We have 30 offices in 22 countries, operating clients in over 150 countries here today. We're about almost a $500 million company now. About 2,000 employees, a public company traded on NASDAQ, and now we support hundreds of systems. So it's pretty interesting. And I think if you really boil it down, if we just got down to the very, very basics, third-party support really solves two major problems at the core. Okay? The first problem is every year, companies like Oracle and SAP charge a massive amount of money every year for their annual maintenance and support. That annual maintenance and support entitles people to call their help desk when something breaks and get some sort of level of support for that, and also entitles people to new versions and forces them on a particular roadmap. The problem with that is that in many times, this vendor provided support is completely inadequate for the mission criticality of the software. Oftentimes it takes days, weeks, and months to get things resolved. And just to think about it, most of the time when we call for a problem, we usually get a low-end engineer that's just typing in your problem into a knowledge base, and then they send you, a handful of documents and say, here, read through all that stuff and see if any of that stuff works. And if it doesn't work, give us a call back, and maybe then I'll escalate this to the next line engineer. So it's a lot of self-support. You're a lot of doing it yourself. It's not like they're logging into your environment and fixing that stuff. And, they don't support all the stuff that really does break, like your customizations and your ABAP code and your automations and your integrations. They don't support any of that stuff. So that problem that we solve is that problem. So we support all of those things. We log into our customer's environment. And when we have a high severity issue, we are logging in, or there's an engineer rolling up their sleeve, logging into that environment in about a minute and a half. All over the world, 24 hours a day, in almost any language that you can speak. And we all do that at typically between 50 and 90% off of what the vendors charge. So it's a basic get adequate level of support, but for a fraction of the cost. That's problem number one. Problem number two that we solve is that when you're under the vendor provided support, you're forced to do these upgrades. And now you've got to do these cloud re-implementations, lose your perpetual licenses, go into this locked-in subscription-based model, and you've got to do it by an end-of-life support date, right? So if you're not off by 2027, 2030, whatever that date is, then you're no longer going to be supported. So you're kind of forced into having to do these projects that in many cases just can't be justified from an ROI perspective, just to re-implement everything to have the same, similar, or even less functionality, which people have today. So it's a very difficult pill to swallow for a lot of folks. So we solve that problem. So when you relieve the vendor provided support and you entrust it to Rimini, you are no longer subject to that end of life support date. Mm-hmm. We remove that threat, and we'll support you for as long as you want to be on the current existing system. If you want to move to the cloud, great. You can do it whenever you want, but you don't have to do it at the vendor supplied dictated date. You can do it, when it makes sense for your organization. So you take that power back in that relationship. You take back control of your own business-driven roadmap, and not be dictated to by these vendors that are forcing people to do these projects that they just don't want to do. So those are really two main advantages.
Yeah, and what's interesting about your model too, and comparing it to the vendor, the software vendor model, is the software vendors have an inherent financial interest in seeing you move off maintenance for these legacy systems, because they want you on the cloud version, the newest, latest, and greatest cloud version, so they get that annual recurring revenue. So it almost seems like maintenance becomes an afterthought, or maybe even a thorn in their side, where it's like, yeah, we have to do this because we have all these legacy customers, but really we want the legacy customers on this new system. We don't want them on the old one. Whereas you guys, that's your cash cow. I mean, that's where you're making your money, is by providing the maintenance. So I can see how you would invest more potentially in providing good support, whereas they might have an incentive to actually provide less support because they want you to feel the pain of that legacy system, so you move on to the cloud system. Do you see that dynamic?
They're using that support as the leverage to force people to go off into their subscription-based cloud. And you're right, it's a recurring revenue thing that they want to get all from all their customers. So it's a continuous pay, and you're so locked in because you can't leave, right?
Right.
And if you do, you've got to re-implement on something completely all over again and go through that pain all over again, probably with another vendor. So, it's a win-win. Third-party support just really provides people two main wins, and that is a massive injection of budget back into the organization. Someone's paying $10 million a year in SAP or Oracle support. We're doing it for 4 or 5. So that is a major win on that. Plus, the whole cost avoidance of these cloud migrations, what oftentimes takes 4 or 5 years, tens of millions of dollars, and plus a massive amount of disruption, loss of perpetual licenses, loss of your customizations that are kind of intellectual property for your business and unique business logic that you're going to have to go away because you have to be cookie cutter like everybody else in the cloud, and that whole risk of that disruption. So it's just a win-win for both saving the costs on the support, but saving all the costs on those forced upgrades too. Right?
Yeah. And you brought up a really important thing in passing here that I want to hone in on, because I don't think enough people use this language and talk about this really important point, and that is the word intellectual property. You talked about how they have intellectual property tied up in customization. And I think we as an industry, when I say we, I mean mainly the software vendors, have a way of being dismissive of that customization. And we call it technical debt. We call it just a mess you need to untangle. And yeah, okay, maybe you over customize. You know, I think most organizations, when they look back, they say, yeah, we probably didn't need to customize as much as we did. But there's a lot of value in, and at least a subset of that customization, a lot of business value that makes you different, unique. I know the vendors all want to say, well, you're not that special. Just run your business like everyone else, but that's not realistic. That's not the world we live in. Yeah. So you guys are providing, though, a different view here. You're not here to say, hey, that's technical debt, you need to get rid of customization. You're saying, let's embrace it. Let's support it. It's the reality, whether you like it or not, whether they should have customized or not. The reality is they did. So how are we going to help them support that rather than judge them for having customized?
You want to have a little fun sometimes. You get some ERP IT folks together in a room and you say, customizations, are they good or bad? And just watch and see what happens, right?
Right.
Because it can be a very feisty conversation. But, this is why people are so confused and why they've over-customized, because they bought the product to do exactly that 20 years ago. Right. We bought these products because it was the most extensible, customizable. SAP even gave us its own language. Right? To actually create our own. That was said, we're going to give you a best practice framework on these modules, and now you can go and customize it so that you can do business in the way that you want to with your unique business logic. They gave you the mechanism to do that. Now you fast forward it now, it's like, well, they can't support all those unique customizations because it would be too difficult for them to do in a cloud model. So then they completely reverse back and say, clean core. You got to go clean core.
Right.
Right. Which means now you got to be cookie cutter like everybody else. So all that unique business logic that you put into place because they told you to a long time ago is now all of a sudden out the window, and now you're going to be doing order to cash processes like everybody else. It's just not. And did we over customize? Yeah, sure. But why don't you put the effort into cleaning up the customizations rather than walking away from all of them altogether? Because they're just too important.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of clients that are taking that exact approach where they're saying, okay, yeah, we over customized. There's some good stuff in there, but there's some stuff we didn't need to. So let's untangle the stuff we didn't need to, but we're going to leave the other stuff.
Absolutely.
You know, let's simplify the environment a little bit. But to your point, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to start over with clean core and just throw it all out. I think that's a fairly reckless way to treat these transformations. Yet that's what the industry is advocating right now. Yeah. And to your point about getting the technical people in a room, I think absolutely true. If I just put my technologist hat on and I forget business for a minute, yeah, of course, I would love to have clean core, because why wouldn't you, right? It's simple. The architecture is easier. The data is easier. There's less to maintain. Sounds great in theory, but the reality is IT should be there to support the business, not the other way around. I think the technologists get a little bit too purist or too, what is it, heretic about the whole thing.
100%. That's right.
So I want to say hello to the audience here. The audience is starting to chime in a little bit. Tushar on LinkedIn joining from India. Thank you for being here today. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Thank you for being here today. Tomer on LinkedIn says, the current stage where SAP requires an upgrade to get support is the leap in Rimini's relevance. So good point, because I think it is, we have a lot of clients that use you guys, even if you're not a household name yet. A lot of our clients are using you guys as a way to give themselves some runway beyond, like for SAP, for example, giving themselves some runway beyond 2030 when SAP is saying you have to be off their old systems. Because you guys, how long are you guys providing SAP ECC support? They're saying 2030. What do you guys do?
Yeah, we'll go pretty much as long as people want to go. If you want to run that same version that you're on for the next 20 years, no problem.
Yeah. I think it's a good opportunity for the market, for customers in the space to take control here and to kind of, because as long as you have customers that are paying Rimini Street maintenance, I imagine you're going to keep providing that maintenance for as long as you can.
20, 30-year-old software, some of the most stable software on the planet out there, right? And software doesn't wear out. It's not like a car or even hardware. It doesn't wear out, I mean, once it's good and stable and running, then, you just find a good support provider like that. And to do upgrades for the sake of doing upgrades are just not in the cards anymore.
Yeah, it's so disruptive too.
Yeah.
Here's a interesting point from Tumar. So it's a bit long. It's not all going to show on the screen here, but Tushar says, enterprise software maintenance typically consumes 15 to 22% of annual IT operating budgets. At scale, that becomes a board-level capital allocation decision, not just an IT operational line item. If roadmap timing is externally dictated, capital strategy often becomes reactive. If a roadmap timing is internally governed, transformation becomes value sequence. So he closes out by saying third-party maintenance is not anti-innovation. It can be a strategic lever to align modernization with business readiness and risk appetite.
Well said.
Yeah, it's really well said. Does he work for Rimini Street?
I don't know, but maybe,
this guy
maybe you should apply. It sounds great.
I know. It sounds like your next sales rep here. So, all right, let's go back to this thread of you guys are providing at least decades of support for a product like SAP ECC. I know you also do it for PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, other systems out there. How do you reconcile the fact that there's still people out there, and this builds on the first question I asked you, which is there's still people that would say, okay, yeah, sounds good. You're providing this runway of additional support, but it's still not the same as it can't be as good as what the vendor can provide because the vendor designed and built the software. How do you find the resources? How do you build the competencies, that rivals that of a vendor? How would you answer that question?
I think that is a very natural initial knee-jerk reaction when people think of, even the third party anything, right? Kind of has this, well, if it's the third party, it's the next level of quality rather than that first level. So you never really have to convince somebody for saving money. That's the easy part, right? That's not the hard part. The hard part is overcoming a perception that it's not as good, or there might be some sort of risk involved with leaving the mothership and going into the kind of this third party support. But when we do these workshops with folks, we go back through some of the ticket history and we see, and if anyone's been in this space as long as you and I have it, we know when you call these vendors for support, just how horrible it is to get that. And a lot of people just stop calling them because it's just not, they just do their own searching on the knowledge base. They have to just go through all of this paperwork. They've got to read it. Meanwhile, their system's down. They can't ship product. They can't issue POs. They can't pay their people. And they just can't play these games of back and forth of ticket updates and constantly trying to escalate to the next engineer. And then you start really taking a look at the financial damage caused by having these ERPs less than 100% up and available, right? So do you get the same support? Absolutely not. You get so much better support because we have a 90-second response time when we have a high severity ticket, and we log into our customer's environment and fix that problem right then and there. And plus, we do so much more than what the vendors do, right? We support all the customizations and automations. We do tax and legal and regulatory updates. We do how-to questions, performance tuning questions, all those kinds of things that come along with it. And then when people start looking at the risks associated with that downtime, the risks associated with cybersecurity being on vendor patches, the risks associated with being on those forced upgrade paths, they slowly start seeing that third-party support isn't the risk creator, it's the risk mitigator, and that they are at massive more risk with vendor-provided support than they would be. And why? Because they're not support companies. They're software creators.
Right.
Go to a support company to do support. Go to the software creators to get the software. It's basically using the right vendor for the right outcomes at the right price.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine if I'm an executive at any of these big guys, SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, I would love nothing more than all these legacy customers just to cancel their support contract and just migrate to the cloud. And I think the challenge there is that their economic interest is so hell-bent on getting customers there.
That's right.
That I imagine you guys are a bit of a thorn in their side because now you're giving this lifeline that they probably rather not see.
A lifeline, that's right. I mean, all they're after is that lock-in. So what I tell people is beware the move-in special, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, when I had an apartment in college, I'd always try to get that apartment that had the first month's rent, for free because they know how
free
difficult,
TV or whatever.
Because they know how difficult it is for you to move out, right? They lock you in. It's very difficult for you to leave. So when I question these procurement people who are taking victory laps around the parking lot because they squeeze the vendor for another 30% on year one, doesn't matter, because when it comes time for renewal and your rent is due, your rent's going up, and it's going up, and there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. So beware of those move-in specials, because I don't care if they give you the first year for free, you're still getting locked into something that is going to be continuously increasing. You're not going to be able to leave.
Right. Yeah, very, very interesting. All right. So what about, I want to come back to another thought here, another thread. are there any other misconceptions you hear from executives about third party maintenance? I know we've covered a couple of them, but I imagine there's other objections or common concerns or questions that you hear from people as you're talking to them about this third party support option.
Probably the biggest one that comes up is security, cybersecurity, right?
Yeah.
So when you get off of the vendor maintenance support, you're no longer entitled to the patches. So people say, well, shoot, if I don't patch, then I'm going to be vulnerable. If I'm vulnerable, I'm going to get hacked. I'm going to get hacked and get fired. Right? So it just all that flies through people's mind. But again, what you have to do the workshops and get down to what is really happening with the outdated patching model from these vendors, right? So if you take a look at, let's say there's a vulnerability detected in the wild and it's reported to the software companies, right? It usually takes them 4, 6, 2 weeks, 2 months to put out a patch. And that patch is usually bundled with a whole bunch of other patches that's now kind of put out, right? So now you're 2 months into having that vulnerability. Now, let's say you go and install that patch the next day, which you don't, because you might want to do it once a quarter, twice a year. But let's say you go and put that patch in. Now you put that in the development environment. Then you have to fix all the stuff the patches break. Then you got to do then you put it in the QA and test environment. Then you do all the regression testing and do your financial close simulations. You run all your reports, and Sally and Bobby and Joey's all got to go through the processes, make sure everything still works. Then by the time you get all that stuff into production, 8 months are gone, a year is gone. Meanwhile, you've been completely vulnerable in production that entire time. And every time you do those patches, there's restarts, reboots, backups that you've got to do, backup plans that you have to do. There's so much disruption. It goes into all those types of things. And if you think about it, those patches really only address known vulnerabilities, because that's the limitation these folks have. People think that it is a advantage because they have access to the source code. It's actually a disadvantage because they only have access to the source code. So they can only do semantic-based kind of syntax, right? If a syntax says that, well, we're going to block that. We're not going to let that in. The hackers just change the syntax around to do the same thing in a different way. So there are much different, more modern approaches to security than the patches. Why? Because they're not security companies. They're software creators, right? If you want to have a general ledger system, look no further than Oracle and SAP. If you want a securities solution, go to a security company. It's what that they do, right? And it's not really rocket science, right? I mean, if you take a look at any ERP, the architecture, right? It's the 3 main architectures we've been describing ERPs forever, right? The web layer, the middleware layer, and the database layer. Every ERP can be talked to in that layer. You protect that web layer, right? Which is all the HTTP traffic. You protect that middleware, which is Java, SOA, .NET, ASP, the kind of the heavy lifting that's in there, and then the database layer, right? And there's great protections out there that protect against known and unknown vulnerabilities through rules-based engines. So I can just create a rule, drop it in, and boom, all of my databases are updated like that. No restarts, no reboots, no regression testing, no downtime, no disruption, and it protects against unknown vulnerabilities too. So I don't have to protect against a particular SQL injection attack, for example. I can protect against all SQL injection attacks because they all have this kind of a framework. And you can't do that at the source code level. You have to do that at the point of entry, right? And so it's just so much better ways to do that even though that these software solutions from a security perspective can have that incremental cost, it actually becomes much less expensive than going through these constant patch cycles and being vulnerable for that entire time by the time you actually get it into production, right? So we need it's much more modern, but we had to do that 20 years ago and maybe even 10 years ago. But today, the security methodologies are just so much more advanced.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, we had a client recently that is running ECC, and they had a cybersecurity breach in their legacy environment. And so the board was very concerned about cybersecurity, as a lot of people are. And they said, hey, based on the cybersecurity breach, we need to upgrade to S4HANA. And it was going to be about a $75 million price tag. And so there were some executives on the team, though, saying, wait, hold on, that seems a little extreme just to address the cybersecurity risk. And so they hired us. We came in, did an assessment. And then as you dig into it, you find, well, it wasn't an SAP security breach. It was actually through a third-party bolt-on. It was backdoor into ECC. So, and then you start peeling back the layers of the onion and thinking, okay, it wasn't really it wasn't an SAP ECC cybersecurity issue. It was a third-party breach. Second of all, you don't need to spend $75 million on an S/4HANA implementation to address the cybersecurity concern or risk that you have. And it sounds like what you're saying.
Common misconception, the upgrade's going to be better security. No, not necessarily, right?
I just saw an article, it was like 2 days ago. I saw this article that was talking about the volume of attempted cybersecurity attacks on SAP and I believe it was Microsoft. I think they looked into these two environments in particular, SAP and Microsoft infrastructure, and they showed just an exponential increase in the attempts on hacking, because now you're consolidating all these high value targets into one, into a consolidated cloud infrastructure environment. So now they're becoming even more appealing for cybersecurities and hackers and things of that nature. So I question whether or not that's even true, that you're somehow having superiority from a cybersecurity perspective. I think you might actually have more risk in some ways.
Well, but because you have no visibility. Patching doesn't give you any visibility. You just put the patches in, you hope it did what it said it was going to do.
Right.
You don't know if it did. You don't know if it mitigated the risk or the vulnerability, and you have no visibility into the attack surface. So you don't know how many attacks did we attempt to get today? How many did we block today? So there's no observability. There's no other information you have in there other than you're patched, and that's all you know. So the effectiveness of the program is just questionable as well, right?
Yeah, very interesting. So Tomer, your future sales rep for Rimini Street, lives in Israel. He says good evening from Israel. So thanks for being here today, Tomer.
Thanks.
Piercy's joining from South Africa on LinkedIn. So thanks for joining here today. And then Darian has a question on LinkedIn. She says, at what point does a vendor's roadmap stop aligning with the customer's business roadmap? Maybe I'll reframe that a little bit and just ask, is this the typical customer that comes to Rimini Street and says, hey, the vendor's roadmap of upgrading just doesn't fit what we want, and we still see the value in our legacy system, therefore we're going to hire you guys to help provide that third-party support? Or what's your average customer situation or problem statement, when they come to you guys?
Simple. It's ROI. That's all it is. You have to take a look at the cost associated with the upgrade and why you're going to do it. Right?
Right.
And I do not allow people to say, so I can get on the latest and greatest. That's not a business reason. I don't allow people to say, so I can get all the new features and functionality. That's not a business problem, right? So if there are actual functions that is in that new version that you want, because remember, it seems like every time we do an upgrade, it's like Christmas morning. We don't know what we get, right? Did we get the cool remote control car, or did we get the pair of socks?
Right.
And of all the new features and functionality, we didn't ask for any of that. It was just stuff that the vendor, we might use it, we might not use it. So you really have to go and take a look at what's in that new state that would make it worth it to do that. And I bet you there's really only going to be 1 to 2, maybe even 0, maybe 3 kind of, well, that'd be nice to have. So now you've got to think, all right, so if I do a $30 million, 3-year-long project, is the return on that investment worth those nice to haves? Number one question. Number two question is, can I get those nice to haves in another way? Right? So does it make sense to redo 100 things to get 2 things? Why not just go and get the 2 things? Right. And I can guarantee you that almost 10 times out of 10, whatever's in there, right, that you would want, that can be done in a different way through additional configuration or maybe even a customization or something of that sort. But I'd even challenge people to say, what just not thinking about what's there, but what would you want it to do? Right. And that is, people want to go, we need to start moving from historical reporting to predictive analytics, get more insights out of the system, get the real-time decision support systems. We've got to improve our order to cash process. It takes me 2 weeks to onboard an employee. I need that down to a half a day. I'm closing my books in 7 days. It needs to be 3 days. I mean, real outcomes that we want over there. And then question, does the upgrade solve any of that? Or are you just picking up what you're doing today and taking those same problems and going from version X to version Y? So you really have to look at the outcomes versus the cost. And then when you realize that you can do things in a different way on your existing system, because the value of your existing system is the data, and you already have that today. So if you want to innovate around that, you can get started tomorrow. You don't have to go through a 4-year-long project just to get started then, because then you're already 4 years behind. You're already 4 years behind now, right?
Right. Yeah. Now, what about contractual / legal considerations, are there certain things that would prevent or preclude a company from going to third party maintenance? I know sometimes we'll get clients that ask that, like, well, contractually, I don't know if we can have someone else support the system.
It's a very common reaction is like, can you even do this? Is this even legal? You know, and it's very simple. So there's two relationships that you have with these vendors. Okay, one is the software license. Okay, where you bought that software license, and that is your now perpetual license software that you have. Perpetual, which means forever, right?
Right.
And then you have the annual maintenance and support relationship with the vendor. They're completely separate teams inside they don't even talk to one another, I don't think, in a lot of these vendors. These folks don't care about these folks. These folks don't really care about these folks, right? So really what you're doing is when you cease the renewal of the annual maintenance of support and you go to a third-party support with Rimini Street, it has absolutely nothing to do with the software. The software doesn't change. The ownership doesn't change. The perpetual licenses don't change. You're just changing out. Instead of taking your Toyota to the Toyota dealership, you're taking it to Bob's Garage. You still have the Toyota, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say the car analogy is a good one, because I think most of us recognize that when we need an oil change on our car, we don't necessarily have to go to the dealership. But this industry was designed before you guys came along. This industry was designed to where you had no options. You had no Bob's Garages available to you. You had to go through the vendor.
Well, it's the whole uprisal of the right to repair. Remember when people were going, hey, it's my iPhone. I should be able to either repair it myself or take it to somebody else. I'm not being forced to do that, and then so you're just seeing people's expectation of not being locked in and enforced by the vendors. I mean, we're the customers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we bought it, right? I mean, we should be able to do whatever the heck we want for it, with it, and not be forced to do things, right? So it's a really interesting problem. The latest one is VMware with Broadcom, right? So Broadcom's going in and telling all the VMware customers they've got to go to a perpetual base license and jacking it up 10x on the price, and people they're sick of being held hostage by these companies. So we support VMware now too. Our phone's ringing off the hook when they see that Broadcom bill. They're like, heck no, this is crazy, right? So yeah, it's becoming a systemic problem, and we're here to really give the power back to the consumer.
Yeah, the irony of it all is not only are they holding you hostage in many ways, but they're holding you hostage to get you into a situation where they have even more leverage to hold you further hostage in the future. So it's like they're doubling down on this whole vendor lock strategy. And I think having you guys as a one of the solutions in the industry that provides an option is a good one. I'm here with Eric Helmer from Rimini Street. We're talking about how customers are using third-party support to regain control of their technology roadmaps. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long tail, viral results, and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 264. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech agnostic consulting provider that helps clients with their selection and implementation journeys related to technology. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to reach out to learn more about either company, you can do so by reaching out via our contact information below. So I'm here with Eric Helmer with Rimini Street. We're talking about how customers are regaining control of their technology roadmaps with third-party maintenance. I don't remember if you and I had talked about this when we were together a few weeks ago, but are you following that litigation, or not the litigation, but the EU investigation into SAP in Europe?
Yeah,
around third-party maintenance.
Really interesting, and I'm not sure if we have a lot of time to get into that today, but I would encourage your audience to Google that and see the investigation that the European authorities are doing with some of the practices of, I think in this case as SAP, and how they're making it difficult for third-party support or threatening back maintenance if you leave and come back, and all these kinds of things that they're just seeing is potentially unfair. So it'll be interesting to see what the final ruling would be on that, and I would imagine whatever that is would probably set an international presence going,
Yeah.
I would imagine, right? So it'll be
Totally
really interesting there. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they're sort of setting the tone for what the rest of the world will likely do. And I think also, where they're at now is they're investigating, like you said, this third-party maintenance, not the third-party maintenance model, but they're investigating SAP's attempts to thwart third-party maintenance by making it very difficult to find third-party support. If you do decide to go back to SAP, they're back charging you for the maintenance you should have been paying to SAP all along, but you end up paying to Rimini or whatever. So it's just really weird business practices that they've been doing for however long, and now the EU's looking into it. So I think at the very least, what will happen is they're going to force SAP to make some sort of concession. That's typically the EU's approach. Is it may not go the distance where they're going to impose anything, but they're going to probably force some sort of negotiation or settlement where they make some voluntary changes to their model. And I imagine that would probably apply internationally too. So that'll be interesting to watch. But I do encourage the audience to just Google SAP EU antitrust third-party support, and you'll find the case about that. It's really interesting. I've done a couple YouTube videos on that as well. So this is all good stuff. What about are there certain types of organizations that are not good fits for the third-party support model? Like, are there ones, people listening here, you'd say, hey, if you fit these criteria, it's probably not a good idea. Go different.
I've only come across a few situations where I'd go to a potential client and go, you know what, this isn't going to work. But mostly it's because they have to nuke their entire ERP anyway.
Right.
So a lot of times there might be a merger or an acquisition or something like that, and the entire chart of accounts has to be, and there's nothing salvageable. It's zero salvageable. They have to just completely nuke everything. It's not a very common case, but sometimes the chart of accounts are so messed up that you can't patch and fix it anymore. It just has to be completely redone and start all over. So if you got to re-implement everything anyway, then maybe you do that in a cloud model and redo it into kind of that latest and greatest. But if you've got a rock solid ERP today to rip and replace all of that, just doesn't make sense in most cases.
Right. What sort of messaging from a customer software vendor should people be aware of if and when they decide they want third-party maintenance? So in other words, I'm a customer, I'm using SAP ECC or JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, whatever, some legacy system. I decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to go check out Rimini Street. I tell my vendor, how can I expect my vendor to respond, and how, just to prepare people for the counter messaging you might hear from the vendor who doesn't want you to necessarily to move to third-party support?
Well, I don't know if you have to share all that information with a vendor that you're considering third-party support, but you can imagine there's going to be some resistance. We've seen the letters that we've seen from Oracle and SAP that are sent to the highest levels of their customers that have some kind of nasty language in there of, saying that you're going to be fired for making this decision. You're going to be insecure without the security patches, just some really stuff. So you can expect some extreme backlash. And my advice to everybody would just be to laugh that off and throw it in the trash. It's meaningless. But sometimes if it gets to be a board. So my suggestion to me would be to tell every level and the board that this is coming. Make it, don't have it a surprise to them and say, you're going to get a nasty email and you're going to get a nasty letter. And it's going to say some of this stuff over here. Just fully expect it, because they're just trying to keep your business, of course. The second thing that I want to do is you must give notice, and you have to give notice on time. It's usually around 90 days or so, but check your contract to find out. If you miss that notification deadline, you're stuck for another year.
Yeah. So
make sure it can't be the last minute decision. And, you're up on December 31st and you put in your notice on December 30th. No, it's not going to work. So you got to plan ahead. So if you're thinking about a journey, let's start thinking 6 months ahead of time, get to know each other. Let us show you what it's like to take a walk down Rimini Street, give you all the bullet points that you need to make the decision. You have plenty of time to do it, so you're not rushed into things. Also, on our onboarding, what we do is a lot of times we'll go into people's archive. So we'll go download all the notes and any kind of versions or things like that, and we kind of put it into an archive. So if you want to have access to that stuff later on, you have it, because you're entitled to it, up until the time your actual maintenance runs out. So we really need some time to do that as well.
Right. So help us understand too the economics of this, the ROI. You alluded to it a little while ago, but I want to dig into that a little bit more. You were talking about some of the significant savings that companies can achieve, which I think in many cases, a lot of times, just to back up, a lot of times clients come to us and say, hey, we just want third-party support because it gives us extra time. But a lot of them aren't even thinking about, I could actually save considerable money doing this. How do you guys price your maintenance offering compared to what the vendors typically charge?
Well, there's a couple answers there. So typically it's 50 to 90% off of what people are paying today. But there's nuances. Like, for example, a lot of people bought this much of the ERP and they're using this much of the ERP.
Right.
But they're paying the 15-20% annual maintenance on this much of the ERP, right? So it's just a massive overage of costs. So we'll right-size that, right? So first of all, we'll right-size that. But I think a lot of people are not just looking to Rimini Street as cost savings and cost avoidance for the upgrades. They're looking at it to accelerate innovation, right? I travel all over the world. I talk to CEOs. And CIOs, what do they want? They're looking for AI capabilities, workflow automation, modern UI platforms, predictive analytics, and real-time decision support systems. They want to start building out data fabrics for AI. They want workspaces, customized intelligent workspaces for the personas that people are getting. So that it's easier for newer folks to get some of these older technologies. That's what they want. That's what they're all talking about. And so let's take a look at how do we achieve those innovations, right? So there's really the two paths. The first path is, we'll upgrade to Rise or Fusion or something like that, right? So our costs go like this. right? Because we have to do that implementation, right? And our innovation goes like this and then this, because you can't even get started with the innovation until you do your 4-year upgrade. Then and only then can you use the jewels and the business process optimization and all that stuff. You can't even get started until you rip and replace everything else. So now you're 4 years out before you even get started, and then your costs keep going up and your innovation keeps getting prolonged. So that's ROI that is complete negative. Now let's look at the opposite. The opposite is you come to Rimini Street, right? And you can get started with your innovation today. So now your innovation goes like this, but your budget stays the same.
Right.
Right. So it's a complete opposite of the ROI. And then people, and as people are looking into the workflow and they're looking into predictive and they're looking at the AI and they're looking at the decision support systems, let's think of the value of the ERP in that equation. Right. Mm-hmm. Where does ERP and AI intersect? Right.
Right.
And to me, the value of the ERP in this quest for AI is the data. It's the data in that system. There's 20 years of data in there. Supplier data, HR data, finance data, marketing data, all these kinds of things that are in there. You can't buy that data, right? It's unique data to you, right? And if you do an upgrade of that data, it's the same data that you've upgraded now in a different version. And you still have the same asset. So the asset that you need today, you already have. It's the data. Get started tomorrow. Let's go get our data orchestration layer on there. Let's go get our data fabric on there. Let's go plug and play all these modernizations around that core system. Let's stop thinking about that ERP as a center of the universe that everything revolves around. Instead, the data fabric and orchestration layer is the center of the universe, and the ERP is just a simple data source like anything else. And let's ingest that into an AI model and do stuff that matters. And because we cannot do these 4-year implementations because the rest of the world has moved on to no-code, low-code platforms.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why, because these vendors are still in hundreds of millions of lines of heavy compiled code, which is the reason why it takes so long even to do the most incremental upgrade. So with these no-code, low-code platforms, I'm doing intelligent dashboards, I'm doing workflow automation, I'm doing business process optimization in weeks and months. Right? Not years and years and years. So people are coming to Rimini Street to shield themselves from that forced upgrade and accelerate innovation on the same budget that they have today.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a client that this just jogged my memory on this, but we had a client recently that's a big construction company, and they multi-billion-dollar company. They were running SAP ECC, and they were on a multi-year journey. They had done a bunch of acquisitions, and it took them years to implement ECC, and they had just finished their last of the phases of the rollout about 3 years ago. And so they had a 7-year business case horizon, where it's like, okay, 7 years to get the ROI and the payback and everything on the ECC investment. But of course, before that last implementation was even done, SAP was already knocking on the door saying, hey, guess what? It's time for an S/4HANA upgrade. Yeah. And, CIO saying, wait, hold on. We haven't even realized the value from the first implementation we just finished. Now you're telling us we've got to upgrade again. And to your point, I think this is where a lot of us aren't thinking ahead to the future. You're right. These multi-year transformations that you do once every 20 years, I think those days are long gone. Or if you're stuck in that model, you're that to me is technical debt. That's being stuck in the past.
Well, I mean, look, we've seen the movie before, right? It was R3. Oh, the whole world's going to change with R3. And then it was like, oh no, it's HANA. You gotta buy this whole thing and restart all over again with HANA. And they're like, okay, finally do that. And then it was like, oh, it's HANA Enterprise Cloud. You got to go to that now, right? And then we go into this. Now it's RISE. What's the next one? What's the next one? And by the time you do this one, what's the next one after that they're going to get you for? I mean, we've seen all this stuff before, but you're right. And I think the world of agentic AI has created an event that has caused the decline of the monolithic ERP, right? It's completely killed the monolith. And we're already seeing it, right? We're already seeing people taking HR out and putting that in the Workday, and CRM out and putting that in the Salesforce. We're decomposing the ERP in favor of more best fit solutions. People are just doing that naturally because they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket that's locked in to one vendor, because there's other vendors that can do stuff better, right? The days of having that one vendor be all things to everybody, it's just simply not there. And what's nice by putting a data fabric on top of that and extracting the user interface layer from that, as an IT person now, I can manipulate anything of the plumbing down to lead. I don't want Workday here anymore. I'm going to bring in ADP for that. I'm going to bring in this. I'm going to bring that. And I can do anything with that, not being locked into one provider and having zero change management at the user level because I've abstracted all that. But now I can change the plumbing to have best fit solutions that's going to give me the best outcomes in the most cost effective way, because we can glue them all together now. The data integration problem that we had 20 years ago have been solved. Things are playing nice with each other now. And if not, we'll get a piece of software that forces them to, right? So it's just a different layer right now. And I think the days of, hey, what kind of shop are you? You're either an Oracle, IBM, Microsoft, or a SAP shop, it's just not. There's no one's just that one shop anymore. So it is now time to start thinking of outcomes, not products, not vendors, but outcomes, and going and finding the right ones and stringing it up together and building a resilient IT enterprise that gives you the ability to retain the right to change your mind and move into something else later, because who knows what the world's going to look like if you go on that rise journey for the next 4 or 5 years. What's the world going to look like in 5 years? And you're still implementing 20-year-old software, right? So it's just it's a lot of things to think about here. But the ERP has its place, but at the end of the day, I think over the next few years, it's just going to be reduced to a transactional system of record that it does so well.
Yeah, that's the big debate in the industry right now, is what will ERP be in the future? Will it be a glorified database that's just a system of record, or will it continue to be a potential source of innovation and that sort of thing? And I think jury's still out on that, but I think the good news with what you guys are doing is you're providing immediate innovation rather than having to wait for a full-blown multi-year cloud implementation to then maybe, just maybe, you'll get to take advantage of AI and some of their cool innovation.
Yeah. And you'd be able to take advantage. It's only going to be in that ERP.
Right.
So that's the problem, right? I mean, people today have hundreds of systems. And every single one of those vendors of those hundreds of systems are all saying, upgrade to my latest version if you want AI. And it's just not feasible.
Right.
So what people are realizing is that AI is done outside of these systems. Why? Because those companies aren't AI companies. If you want AI, go to AI company. You want security, go to security company. If you want support, go to support company, right? It's the same message over and over again. So you extrapolate that out into a different layer through a data fabric, and then all these systems become source systems into that model. That way you're doing it once with a real AI company, and all the rest of these systems just become a data source. Mission critical. I don't want to. They have to be up all the time. Don't get me wrong, but the days of it being the end all and be all of a company, it's just simply over. So if you subscribe to that theory that this is what the ERP is going to look like, which is going to be a bunch of independent processes, it's no longer going to be modules. It's going to be that handles my order to cash process, that handles my hire to retire process, that handles my supply chain process. Whether that's an external system, I wrote it myself, it's part of the ERP, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. So we're going to use the best fit solution. We can string it all up, and we're going to give Joey his little intelligent workspace over here that has all the stuff that he needs, with a little AI chatbot that he can kind of integrate with, and it can give him predictions and say, hey, you better jump on this because this problem is going to happen. That's the future. And if you agree with that, and you go on this innovation journey with Rimini Street, you get to leapfrog everybody else that decided to go to Rise and aren't even going to get any part of innovation done for the next 4 or 5 years, and you're going to skate to that puck. So if you want to consider that tech debt, I say congratulations, because you dodged a bullet. You didn't have to go and do that huge upgrade. You didn't have to do that huge Snowflake implementation that brings all your data together in one place. You can go out now and get real outcomes done today in a way that actually moves the needle for the company, right? So it's just a different way of thinking, and I challenge people to really challenge those traditional methodologies that we've done for the last 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah, and it's hard to cut through the noise in the industry too. And when I say noise, noise probably isn't the right word. It's more just the volume of information and viewpoints that are out there that run completely counter to what we're talking about here today.
Sure.
In fact, I want to pull up this comment because I think this is indicative of what we see in the industry. This is from a comment we just got on YouTube. And I'm not sure what exactly this person is referring to, but they said, you're a consultant, bro, get real. You should play nice. And when I saw this comment, I'm not sure if this is what the person meant, but I feel like there's times in this industry, and I'm curious to see what you think, Eric. I feel like there's times in this industry where you should conform to the mainstream thinking. You should not be challenging the way this industry was built. And in fact, I'm writing a book right now about this, about the systemic breakdowns in this industry and how that's the root cause of why there's so many failures. But I think a lot of it is this groupthink of like, if I'm part of the SAP ecosystem and I work for one of the big four consultancies, I work for an industry analyst firm, or if I work for SAP directly, you've got hundreds of thousands of people out there. They're drinking the Kool-Aid saying third-party support sucks. You should just forget that technical debt, move to S/4HANA, get the innovation, towing the company line. So, voices like Rimini, you guys aren't a tiny company, but do you find that it's hard to compete with the megaphone that the big incumbent vendor communities have, if that makes sense? Like, because you have so many people parroting the same stuff that's gotten us into the same problems and challenges and failure points and all that stuff over decades. And now you've got, you've got this. So
sometimes, sometimes it is because, people have been in this industry for a long time, right? And I was in the industry, right? I did like what everybody else did. We upgrade every 3 years. This is what we do, and this is the vendor roadmap, and that's just how we kept our jobs. Right? It's what we did. But I think the interesting thing about Rimini Street is that we are able to show people that they have options. And I know you may not want to believe me, but we are really agnostic, because it doesn't matter if someone decides to go to S4 or Rise or Fusion, because we do managed services and consulting as well on those platforms. So if people are on that journey already, we'll happily embrace that, and we can provide products and services on those new platforms. But I think that we would be remiss to not challenge traditional thinking so that people know that they have options, and challenge why they want to do these. Look, everybody else in the ecosystem wants people to make as much change as possible. The hardware companies, the big SIs, the software programs, they all want you to do all these upgrades because everybody gets fed along the way. Rimini Street is the only one who's coming in saying, do you really need to? Maybe you don't. Maybe you can go spend money on other stuff that matters and moves the needle for your company, and you may not do that. So to me, it's not a consulting, it's not a means to an end. It's just like, hey, the time is different now. Things are different now. Technology is different now, and you have an option. And the best thing at the end of the day is use some of our calculators. Look at how much it's going to cost to move to something like Rise or Fusion. Look at what the ROI is going to be, and see what my favorite metric is, and that is year payback. Do you get year payback in year 1 or 2? Okay, maybe it's worth it. Do you get year payback in year 20? Hang on, maybe we should think about other ways of getting the outcomes that we want in different ways. So to me, it's agnostic. I'm playing nice with everybody, but I'm playing nice mostly with our customers to give them all of the options they have available to make the best decision for them.
Right. Yeah. Now, you talked about some of the international presence you guys have before we went live here today. You were talking about some of the international travel you have coming up. Tell us a little bit about your international operations. Where does the support reside? Where do your customers reside? Just tell us a little bit about the reach geographically.
Yeah, so we are all over the world. We have engineers all over the world. We have, but we do have some central centers in Kuala Lumpur and some in India, but they're actually all over in Europe, all over. Big contingency in Latin America and Sao Paulo, Brazil. So we're all over because we have to be a 24-hour company, 7 days a week. So again, we have 30 offices in 22 countries. We have a lot of remote engineers as well that work out of their house. That are ex-consultants or ex-Oracle or ex-SAP that want to get off the road for that. Our breakout is about half of our revenue comes from North America. Okay? And then the rest of it is made up. We got about 30% in Asia Pac, about 15% in EMEA, and then probably 5 or 10% on kind of the rest of the world. So, and we're quite diversified in almost every industry. We have a lot in telecommunications and manufacturing and retail operations because those are a lot of high volume, low margin business. It's very competitive, so they're trying to save as much pennies as possible, along the way. just folks all over. Yeah. So I do a lot of events. I'm kind of a spokesperson for the company. So I'm a keynote at Gartner events and IDC events. We host different kind of events around the world that we call Street Smart events, where they're like little mini conferences where we bring our customers and prospects together and kind of talk about the issues of the day. Because to be honest, people don't know who to believe anymore. They just don't know who to believe anymore. So it's best for us to get our customers and prospects together and let them talk amongst each other about what they're doing in this. How are they pushing back? Are they drinking the Kool-Aid? Should they do this? And bring people together. Let them have their own forum to think about things in a way and develop some peer relationships and a trust network, because it's just so noisy out there, as you said. So we're trying to do everything we possibly can just to spread the word of what options people have. And they can make the best decisions that they want. But where I don't find it acceptable is not knowing your options, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's, do you still run into a lot of people that aren't familiar with the third-party support model? I mean, I know people that contact you, obviously they know, but
yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like I said, I do a lot of Gartner events, right? And I like to poll people as they kind of walk through the conferences. Have you heard of Rimini Street? And many haven't. Many just don't know that third-party support is an option. They didn't even know about it. And then they go through that initial knee-jerk reaction. When I tell them what we do, they have that initial knee-jerk reaction of like, whoa, can I even do this? Is this legal? What about security? What about this? So there's initial natural tendencies for people to kind of question it until they really understand the whole thing. And usually that takes a few meetings, a few workshops, a few calculators, a few analysis of ticket history and things like that to let people, maybe a couple reference calls to talk about some of our other customers and their experience with us. And then we eventually get that over the line. So pretty interesting. And really the forced upgrades that are looming, especially in the world of SAP right now, is really accelerating the conversation, because many people, even if they got started today, they'll never make the deadline. They'll never, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a tough situation for everybody right now.
Yeah. What's your recommendation then, just to bring this all full circle? What's your recommendation to anyone who's just trying to figure out what their options are, whether it's third-party support or just trying to figure out what their roadmap forward can or should be?
My big thing is, please try to do everything you can to take the emotion, the loyalty, and the alliances out and boil it down to a science program, right? A science problem, right? I know it seems daunting, and that's the bad news. And there's a lot of options, and that's also the bad news. But the good news is it's finite. Right? It's not like an unlimited amount of options, right? You either run the car for a little bit longer, you go to the software vendor's cloud, or you rip the whole thing all out and take everything to Workday. There's only a few options that you have out there, and now boil it down to a math problem of cost versus ROI and the year payback. What are you going to get out of this? And it's got to be down to dollars and cents. It can't be, well, this is part of our IT 2.0 initiative for next year. None of that stuff means anything, right? You've got to say, how does it impact the bottom line of the business? There's so much change in the office of the CIO right now. We're seeing a lot of churn right there because boards are expecting CIOs to do more business plans and ROI proving before they're going to justify a project. They're not allowing CIOs to go in there and say, well, it's year 3, it's time for that upgrade again, I need my 20 million. That's just not flying anymore, right? So they've got to justify projects through how it's going to impact the bottom line of the business, take market share from competitors, get better analytics, reduce risk profiles, increase margins, increase sales. There's got to be towards some sort of business initiative. As you said, the IT has to support the business, right? They're not just going in there saying, I need a budget to let me do whatever I want to do. So we're seeing a lot of old CIOs struggling to put those business cases together, those ROI. So they're bringing in other folks in there that can think a little bit differently and have more of a business hat, so that they can help drive the bottom line.
Right. All right. Thank you, Eric. Great conversation. Really appreciate your time here today. Appreciate the audience questions. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to debrief from this conversation, and then we'll actually share with you a video clip, case study of a customer of ours, a client of ours that recently was trying to navigate the decision of whether or not to shift from a legacy version of SAP onto S/4HANA. And it's a great case study and a good series of lessons learned for any company that's trying to navigate a potential change to their ERP system, even if it's not SAP. So Be sure to stick around. We're going to get to all that and more when we come back from a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 264. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Eric on the show from Rimini Street. We talked about third-party maintenance, how to use that as a way to regain control of your digital strategy and roadmap. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from the conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation. I love when Rimini Street, whoever comes from there, comes on, because I feel like they have a lot of insight into what's going on with these ERP vendors right now and what the customers are really feeling. Couple follow-up questions I have though for you, Eric. First of all, being on the justification of upgrading and how it's kind of like a math problem in a way. One question I have is, how often is the latest and greatest mistaken for a business case?
Very often. In fact, the word business case is starting to fall out of favor, and it's becoming less and less common to see companies that are creating a business case or thinking about ROI. And to me, that's a scary spot to be in when you're doing it for intangible reasons, like we want to be future proof, we want to get rid of technical debt, we want to be on the latest and greatest. Like you said, those might be reasons, they might even be good reasons, but that's not enough. You've got to have more of a North Star or guiding light to guide you in the implementation, because it's one thing to say we want to modernize, we want to upgrade. It's another thing to say we want to improve our business, and here's how. Without that clarity of how you want to improve your business, it makes technology decisions very hard, and it makes them more of a guess than anything. So even during the implementation, you run into governance issues and problems keeping the project on track and keeping people focused, because you don't have that clarity of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And then it ends up being the vendor or the system integrator that convinces you that more technology is better, and just keep adding technology to the mix and you'll be more feature proof. When the reality is that might just mean you're going to have more shelfware, more costs, more unused technology, more frustration, more complexity, without solving any real business issues necessarily. So that's the way organizations need to look at it, but not enough companies look at business cases these days. It's fairly shocking that not more companies don't consider ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the side of like innovation on whether you should accelerate or delay for your company, one question I have on that is the real ERP asset the software or the enterprise data inside of it?
It's mainly the data inside of it, because the software itself, especially in today's cloud world, the software today is becoming somewhat of a commodity, because multi-tenant cloud, public cloud, software as a service, it's all the same tool set that a software vendor owns. So it's not really a distinct competitive advantage, and it's not intellectual property for you. Your only differentiator or source of competitive advantage or intellectual property is going to be the data itself. And if you do customize, the customization you make, that's going to end up being your secret sauce. That's going to be the issue or the things that organizations need to think through.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question I have from the conversation is, as far as vendor lock-in and subscription risk goes, Do subscription models increase long-term vendor leverage?
They do. I think the vendor leverage and power is increasing with every new cloud customer, every migration with the clean core and without customization. That's putting more control and more leverage in the hands of software vendors. Now it's giving them scale too. It's giving them the ability to provide these cloud software solutions at scale, which could be a good thing, but it also means you're ceding a lot of that control to the vendors, not just in terms of your day-to-day operations and your day-to-day technology usage, but also in terms of long-term, what your options are. You're limited and the switching costs are high, and higher now than it's ever been in today's cloud environment. So that is something, it's a good question, something that organizations should be mindful of, and they should go in with eyes wide open when they enter those sorts of projects.
Yeah, for sure. But overall, what a great conversation with Eric. I feel like that he gave a lot of different insights.
Yeah, he had some really good insights and good stuff to talk about. He's a good guy. They're an interesting company, a good company, and we've got a lot of clients that are using their services and have been happy with it and have seen cost savings and that sort of thing. We're not affiliated with them. They're not a customer of ours. We're not a customer of theirs, but I would consider them a fellow disruptor in the industry. And when I say disruptor, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean just providing options, giving people an option that's free of the vendor sales and marketing spin. So good stuff there. And just building on that, and speaking of Rimini Street clients, this case study we're going to share with you right now is actually a Rimini Street customer. Coincidentally, by the way, it's not the purpose of this conversation, but you'll hear us talk about it in the video. This is a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about a client of ours, an actual case study without mentioning them by name, but it's an actual case study of an SAP ECC customer that was trying to navigate the decision of what do we do? Do we upgrade? Do we stick with what we've got? Do we get third-party support, et cetera, et cetera? And, I won't spoil the ending, but I'll share with you the whole story here in the video, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So here's a case study of a company that's trying to figure out how to navigate their legacy roadmap going forward. So let's talk about the specific situation that this client was facing. To start from the beginning, a few years ago, I got a call from the CIO at the time of this company. Called and said, we're about to migrate to S/4HANA and we want your help with strategy and change management and helping us implement the overall solution. And we had several great meetings that looked like we were probably going to win this client. But fast forward a few months, it turns out that they never moved forward with an SAP project and we never worked with them at the time. So then you fast forward another year to 2 years later, I get a call from the COO who said the CIO is no longer with us and I've taken over IT for the time being, and I'm trying to figure out what to do now about the ECC software we're using now and how we may or may not move to S/4HANA. And two of the things that were causing a concern at the board level on down through the organization was they had recently had a cybersecurity breach. So they had a significant breach as a material. Someone got in through one of their backdoor third-party legacy systems, and that was creating concern that maybe we need to upgrade to S/4HANA to navigate that challenge. The other dynamic at play was that the old CIO, who had left shortly before I got this call, had planted in the minds of the board that S/4HANA was the only way that this company was going to survive in the future. This is a legacy company that's been around for close to 100 years. It's in the Midwestern US, but with global operations, very blue-collar mentality. And he had convinced the board that the only way this company could scale and survive and navigate the cybersecurity issues and the maintenance sunset issues that SAP was introducing, the only way to navigate that risk would be to upgrade to S/4HANA. So now the board, for the most part, was thinking we need to upgrade to S/4HANA, and that's the only option we have. So the COO, who's been with the company for a long time and has seen the ebbs and flows of technology and operational changes and market changes in the company, said something didn't feel right. He wasn't convinced that that was the right path for them. So they called us. They called us back in to come in and do an assessment to figure out, do they need to move to S/4HANA? If yes, when do they need to move to S/4HANA? And what would that strategy be? So this entire situation, all these different moving parts I just described, led to a huge amount of pressure internally and a decision point that had to be made. And that's what I'll talk about next. So this all created a significant amount of pressure within this organization. The CIO came in as a new resource, very credible resource, someone who's very experienced, knew SAP very well, had a lot of experience with SAP, and pushed very hard to move forward with an S/4HANA implementation. So much so that it actually reminded me of an expert witness case I had years ago where someone got sued, who was a CIO, they got sued for getting kickbacks from the software vendor as a result of making decisions on behalf of the company. Now, I'm not saying that happened here, but it did remind me of that case because he was so adamant about wanting to move forward with S/4HANA. And he did a really good job selling the concept of S/4HANA to the board, and he also did a really good job selling the risks of not moving to S/4HANA. So he really hit home the things that the board was worried about. They were worried about cybersecurity. They're worried about not being able to take advantage of AI. They're worried that the S/4HANA maintenance was going to run out through SAP by 2030. So all these things added up to a board who said, we've got to do something. We can't expose ourselves to this sort of risk. But what this person did not do, the CIO did not do, is he did not adequately lay out the risks and the problems and also the alternatives they had to navigate those same risks, but at a much lower price tag and a much lower risk profile. And what's really interesting about this case too, is that not the entire board is unanimously on board with making this change, but despite the fact that some of the board members had a bad experience with S/4HANA implementations at other companies that they had been board members of, they still wanted to move forward with the project because they thought that was their best and only option. The good news is that they had other options that they hadn't considered, and that's what I'll talk about next. So here's the conflict that this organization faced. The CIO had planted seeds of doubt with the board that they could possibly succeed and continue with ECC. They believed, because of him, that they had no choice but to move to S/4HANA. You also had the fact that cybersecurity was an issue. You had the fact that S/4HANA maintenance was running out on SAP, and those are all concerns of the board. But the COO, who reached out to me after the CIO departed the company, said something didn't feel quite right, and he really questioned the value and the purpose of investing close to $100 million on an S/4HANA upgrade. And the biggest thing that he pointed out, which I found very interesting, and I don't think I've heard a leader bring this up themselves without me bringing it up to them, is the fact that he said, you know what, we have so much intellectual property built up in our ECC customization. And I know a lot of you listening just cringe at the word customization, and you think, well, that's technical debt, and they're not future-proof if they're using an old version of the software and they have customization. The reality is they've got competitive advantage in that software, whether you like it or not. Whether you think that software is modern or going to sustain into the future or not, it is their competitive advantage. And what he was worried about is if they went to SAP Clean Core, they would throw out that intellectual property and they wouldn't necessarily have a way to navigate that. You add to the fact that they did a gap analysis and found that there were a lot of significant gaps between what S/4HANA could do out of the box versus what their business operational needs were and what their business model was. So this created a huge amount of conflict. You had a board who was very concerned, wanted to move to S/4HANA. You had a COO who wasn't sure, and you had an IT group that was probably leaning a bit towards S/4HANA, but it's easy for them to because it's the latest and greatest. It helps build up their resume, and it's not necessarily their money they're spending. So you had a lot of conflict and a lot of turmoil in this decision, and so they hired our team to come in and assess. So despite this tension and this conflict and these differing opinions of what to do about their current SAP ECC environment, the resolution that they agreed on and what we recommended to the organization was to stick with ECC for now. Not forever, but just for now. In the meantime, get third-party SAP support to buy a lifeline until 2040. Get some third-party cybersecurity tools to address the board's cybersecurity concerns. That's not something you need S/4HANA for. You can do that with third-party tools. And by the way, the system that was the culprit of the cybersecurity breach that they experienced with ECC had nothing to do with ECC. The hacker had gotten in through a third-party regulatory system that they had to use. They got in through that system to access ECC. So even with S/4HANA, you're still not going to be able to stop nefarious behavior just because you've upgraded to a new system when there's third-party software involved. So they looked at ways that they could use third-party cybersecurity tools. And the way they left it with the board was we will check in on an annual basis to see how things are going. And at some point in the future, we will probably need to go ahead and make that move to S/4HANA. But in the meantime, the way they looked at it was it makes sense to stick with ECC and use that $100 million that they just saved by not moving to S/4HANA they could reinvest that in factories or new product development, new employees, strategic initiatives, other things that will actually help grow their business with a much lower risk profile than an ERP implementation. So that was a clip from my YouTube channel where we talk about a SAP customer that was trying to figure out how to navigate the forced upgrade or the potential forced upgrade from ECC to S4HANA, which is a very relevant conversation, even if you're not an SAP customer. If you're a Microsoft customer, you're facing the same thing. If you're on Oracle, you're probably facing the same thing. Even Epic or Infor and some of the other software vendors out there that historically were on-prem, if you're using one of those legacy systems, you're probably under some pressure now to move to the cloud or move to the latest and greatest. So it's a very relevant conversation, case study for lots of organizations, even outside of SAP. But what were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, I thought the video was really, really interesting in my opinion. I found it really interesting about the security breach because that really triggered the urgency to migrate, but it really had nothing to do with ECC. Like the hacker entered through third-party system, meaning S4HANA wouldn't have prevented it anyways. So I found that part super interesting. With that, is third-party SAP support often pitched as a bridge, but what are the real risks of leaning on it too long?
Yeah, we didn't get into that in the conversation. That, in hindsight, that's a great question for him or for a third-party support customer. You do run the risk if we're still talking about this 10 years from now and you're still on the current version of the software and you're getting that third-party support, it might be fine. But at some point, you've got to say, all right, it's we bought ourselves some runway, but now we're just flat out in a situation where we're in a bind because over time, what happens, even if Rimini Street can and will provide support beyond, say, 10 years from now, which I think is their stated goal, is to provide support for SAP and some of these other legacy systems at least through 2040, and they would likely extend that. But even if they do extend that, you have to start wondering, like, are we going to be able to find resources that still know that software, that older version of the software? It's going to be harder and harder over time to find people that know it and that can support it. So even companies like Rimini Street might struggle 10, 15, 20 years from now. But I also think by then, most companies will have moved on to something else, and Rimini will probably be providing support for other types of technologies going forward based on how things evolve in the market. So I think it's something to be aware of. I just think that as long as you're doing it on your timeline, it's whatever you need to do, right? And we have customers still to this day that come to us, not as often as we used to, but still occasionally you get that customer who's been on the same mainframe application for 40 years. And I'm not saying keep your ERP system for 40 years, but you know what? The lights are on, the company's running, they're successful. Yes, it's janky. Yes, it's hard to maintain and it's risky, but in some ways you obviously have to look at the risk of maintaining an old system versus the risk of going through a transformation, which has its own risks. You have to look at both. And most organizations will just look at the risk of not having the latest and greatest technology and support to go with it without considering the fact that actually it could be more risk to go through a transformation in some cases. So you've got to assess both. And at some point when that risk profile makes sense for you to go through an upgrade, maybe it's because you have the right resources now, you've got the right focus, the technology has gotten old enough that now you need to do something, then at some point the ROI starts to make sense and you can move forward. But I think the key is to do it on your time frame, not necessarily on a technology roadmap time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question I have today on this topic is, what would you say to board members who knew S4HANA had failed at other companies they served, but it still felt like it was the only option?
I don't know. How do I say it tactfully? I don't want to offend anyone or it's easy to play armchair quarterback or to, be on the outside looking in and you just have a different perspective. But I'd say, think long and hard about it. I mean, you do have 10 years ago. Yeah, maybe that was true where you didn't have any real options beyond SAP, maybe Oracle, if you're a big company. But now you do. You've got all kinds of composable ERP, best of breed, low code, no code, keeping your legacy system. I mean, there's so many different things you can do that you don't have to be stuck with one incumbent, which, by the way, I don't think will be the incumbent number one software provider for long. I think those days are over, and I think a new category is going to come in and disrupt this ERP space. It might be AI, it might be something else, but I just don't see, and Eric alluded to this too in the conversation, I just don't see how this model will sustain another round of big, massive, multi-year implementations, and then what, 10 or 15 years from now, the next big thing is going to come around and we're going to do it all over again. I just think those days are over, to where now there's just so many different lighter, lower cost, lower risk options out there that companies are going to start to gravitate towards that, rather than thinking they have to spend tens of millions of dollars on a big, massive ERP implementation every time they want to, or feel like they need to make the change. So my advice to board members, leaders would be, think long and hard and understand what the risks are, and be sure you make a deliberate, educated decision, an objective decision before you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great conversation today. I found it super interesting.
Yeah, great stuff. Great audience participation. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to Eric for being on the show. Thank you, Darian, for another great episode. And thank you all for listening. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday. TransformationGroundControl.com. Produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. If you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help you with selection, with implementation of software, with recovering a project that's gone sideways, feel free to reach out. I've included my contact information below. So hope you all have a great week. We'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care, and we'll see you next time.